Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. As the holiday season approaches, in this special edition we take a look at what's becoming a booming sector in the tourism industry, catering to the female traveller. Now, to give you some idea, between 2014 and 2017, the number of women travelling alone increased from 59 million to 138 million. Those figures issued by the World Tourism Organization. And Hostel World, an online hostel booking platform, says that bookings by solo female travellers increased by 45% from 2015 to 2017, compared with a 40% increase for men. But it's not just a 21st century trend. In the past, women, albeit far fewer in numbers, did strike out on their own. Let's take a look at the lives of three extraordinary female explorers.
In 1766, it was forbidden for women to join a ship's crew. But Jeanne Barré leapt aboard as Jean Barré, passed off as the botanist Commerçant's assistant. 2 years later, her secret was uncovered in Tahiti. Her adventure continued to Mauritius, where Commerçant died. When she returned to France in 1775, Jeanne brought back 5,000 species of plants, around half of them unknown.
Elle a transgressé. Elle a mis un pantalon.
She rebelled. She wore trousers, which was forbidden. She wore her hair loose, which was forbidden. And she was Commerçant's lover, which was also forbidden. But none of that bothered her, because she was deeply independent.
A century later, Elizabeth Jane Poshran became Nellie Bly, the investigative journalist. She covered factories and hospitals before being sent to the fashion supplement. In 1888, she decided to travel around the world in 80 days and ended up beating Jules Verne's protagonist by 8 days, becoming the heroine of a generation. After her boss told her only a man could pull it off.
They're known as adventuresses, and this has very pejorative connotations in French. It signifies that these women had a corrupt lifestyle, which isn't necessarily the case.
Young Belgian-French singer Alexandre David Niel converted to Buddhism aged 21. In 1912, she left for Asia, promising her husband she would be back within 8 months. Her journey lasted 14 years. In Tibet, she managed to enter Lhasa, the capital forbidden to foreigners, after walking 2,000 kilometres disguised as a beggar.
Amazing people. And joining me now in the studio is Kelly Saunders, an Australian based in Paris. She is a gender equality strategist in the transport sector. Kelly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Annette.
Why has women's solo travel so kicked off in the last few years?
I think it's a confluence of a few factors myself. Firstly, you've got a number of cohorts of women who are travelling all at once. You have the 20-something backpackers who have been travelling for many years now, but you also have the 40-something, 50-something women who have decided not to have children or their children have left the home and they are financially and socially quite independent, and so they are hitting the road. And then you've got the baby boomers who have now retired, and they are a very wealthy cohort and they are keen for adventure. So I think the fact of all of these women coming together. And finally, you've got the social media phenomenon, which enables all of this. You've got review sites which enable women to really research their trips with precision, the blogs which inspire women to travel, and you've got communities, online courses around safety. So I think these things are all coming together.
But is it just safety that differentiates the way that women travel as opposed to men?
In terms of solo travel around the world, I think safety would have to be the biggest differentiator. We know from the statistics that sexual harassment and sexual assault, it's 96% against women. So, that is a huge differentiator. And I think you speak to most solo women travellers, that results in a permanent vigilance around safety, which I think men don't have that same experience. So I would say primarily it's a logistical exercise which is around safety.
Social media and certainly platforms such as Instagram are very good at promoting the idea that far off lands are indeed not only exotic but safe and accessible. But you and I know that in certain parts of the world that still isn't the case, that there are still traditional societies that very much frown upon women been in the public space on their own, don't they?
That's true. There is certainly a celebration of women travelling solo to a certain point, but after that there's a certain chastisement at one end of the spectrum where, it's sort of taking unnecessary risk, right through to, as you say, being frowned upon, that you are not a good person or not a good woman if you are travelling alone. We want women travelling in the world. We want women travelling in the public space and learning and taking all of those enriching experiences back into their lives.
So don't be scared off, in other words.
Yes, I would say that. And I would say that really the focus has to be on the real causes rather than, blaming the women themselves for those choices to travel to intrepid places. It's about looking at, what can we do to actually address this massive epidemic of violence against women. I mean, that's the real question.
And it certainly isn't stopping women, is it? Because as we see there, the figures are on the rise.
It's true, but I would realistically say that most women would admit to a certain level of anxiety when they do travel alone, and I think that's just part of the reality when you travel alone, right through to, women actually modifying their travel patterns when they're on the road, right through to not going out. For example, a lot of women don't go out at night when they're travelling solo because they don't want to take that risk. So yes, they are travelling and they are doing it despite their fears, but I still think that there's a lot of things women don't do on the road, and that opportunity is an opportunity lost. So we still don't really fully understand that impact.
Let's just pause there for a moment, Kelly, because not surprisingly, the number of travel agencies specialising in female travel are rising rapidly. Our reporters followed a group of women on such a trip.
Mother and daughter team Caroline and Charlotte Soulet have 8 hours to complete as many challenges as possible. It's a Viennese treasure hunt for Charlotte's 18th birthday.
Ici, après on marche 5 minutes.
The aim is to explore the city and its heritage from every angle. First stop, a traditional Austrian clothes store.
C'est bon pour toi?
This year, Charlotte left to pursue her studies far from home.
On se fait souvent que des soirées toutes les deux. Quand
We often have fun evenings in, just the two of us, when Dad and my brother Edouard are out. But this time, we thought we'd do a slightly longer outing.
It's a race like any other, with one big exception. There's not a man in sight. The founders of Pop in the City, the group behind the concept, believe that women can be more daring when there's no men around.
It stops them feeling judged, from feeling like they're competing against each other, or that they're competing against men, and the feeling that they're out of their depth when it comes to sporting performance.
Like Sophie and Anne Cattel, who are getting the hang of rowing together.
It's really pretty. We haven't mastered the technique yet, but we're making the most of it.
Rowing down the Danube makes a change from their day jobs as doctors and mothers.
It's hard work, but also a break from routine. It's a different type of tiredness, a different environment. So in a way, it's escapism.
The idea was to find original activities to do together, to explore a new city in a different way, and try things we would never usually do.
Like ziplining, for example. For Pop in the City, the formula seems to be paying off. After Vienna, Seville, Paris and Geneva are the next stops on the Women's Urban Adventure course.
Now in the studio with me is Kelly Saunders, an Australian based in Paris. She is a gender equality strategist in the transport sector. Kelly, how are public transport companies responding to the needs of women?
I would say governments are now starting to study women's travel patterns and understand that there's a difference between the way men and women move, but that at the operator level we still have a perception that mobility is somehow gender neutral. And because of this you see a lack of concrete projects which really dramatically transform women's safety and some of the major issues that make women's travel complex. And so I think part of this reason is because the mobility sector, transport, is largely led by engineers. That's a fact. And
they tend to be men?
And they tend to be men. And as Dr. Bridget Burdett, a New Zealand researcher, said, engineering schools don't teach you about anxiety. And I think that's a very interesting comment around the disconnect between the focus for engineers and the reality for the majority of people using public transport, women. So I think the way to deal with that, we're not going to change engineering schools overnight, but we need to ensure that engineering experts take their place amongst other experts. So you bring in tourism experts, you bring in health and justice and education experts, so you get a richer idea of what mobility really means and how to really solve those issues. So yes.
Can you give me a concrete example of where that would work?
Well, I mean, one of the things that is really being done well by universities now is in the labs is this idea of co-design. So you're bringing together a whole lot of stakeholders and you're actually ensuring that women in the room are the lead expert because they're the experts in their own safety. And so this is where you get a lot of new ideas and you're ensuring that the engineering expert takes their place, but amongst other stakeholders.
What does the future actually hold for women's travel, especially when you take into account climate change also?
Yeah, and there's some interesting research coming out of Sweden which says that women are particularly sensitive to arguments around the environment and climate change as a means of changing their mode of travel. So what I would anticipate is that increasingly women will feel the heat of climate change, but the heat of flight shaming, as we call it, and that we may see more of a movement into domestic travel and a sort of evolution in eco-tourism focused on women's solo travel.
So more sailing on yachts and catamarans across the Atlantic?
Perhaps, yes.
Kelly Saunders, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for now, and this is our last show for 2019. We're going to be back in 2020 with more stories about the women who are indeed reshaping our world. Wishing all of you happy holidays, and we're going to leave you now with images of some of the wonderful people that I've met in the last 12 months. So until our next show, bye for now.